My wife died in a car accident at dawn on September 15th, coming back from a work event that never existed. She was with my brother-in-law, Ricardo, in the passenger seat, both naked from the waist down, when the car flipped on the highway. The firefighters called me at 3 a.m. to tell me that my wife of 12 years had died, but they didn't tell me the sordid details at the time. I was at home, taking care of our 2 children, thinking she was working honestly for our family. When I arrived at the accident scene and saw my brother-in-law there too, dead, I thought he was just giving her a ride. Before continuing this story that will destroy everything you believe about family and loyalty, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This is very important because YouTube's algorithm needs to know that you like this type of content so I can bring you more real stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered a betrayal when it was too late? Because I'm going to tell you exactly how I discovered that my entire life was a lie built by my own family. The revenge I executed afterwards will leave you speechless, and you'll understand why, sometimes, justice comes in ways we never imagine. I was always a hardworking, honest guy who believed in family above everything. Married to Fernanda for 12 years, 2 beautiful children, a house I paid for with a lot of sweat. She was always dedicated to work, traveled a lot as a business consultant, earned well, and I never suspected anything. Ricardo, my brother-in-law, her brother, was always close to our family, had lunch at our house every Sunday, was godfather to my youngest son. I trusted him like a blood brother, even lent him money several times when he was going through difficulties. I thought I had a united, solid family based on love and mutual trust. The first strange signs began at the wake, when I noticed that her family was strangely too calm for people who had lost 2 members at once. My mother-in-law wasn't crying, just looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher at the time. Her brothers whispered among themselves and stopped talking when I approached. The family lawyer showed up at the wake, which I found strange, but I thought it was to resolve insurance issues. When he pulled me aside and said we needed to talk urgently about important financial matters, I felt a chill in my stomach, but I still had no idea what was coming. The first bomb exploded 3 days after the burial, when I went to the bank to resolve our joint account and discovered there was no more money. Our savings account with $45,000 had been completely emptied over the last 2 years, always with transfers authorized by her. The manager showed me the transactions, amounts of $1,250, $2,000, $3,000, always to accounts I didn't know. When I asked for detailed statements, I saw the money went to Ricardo's accounts, my mother-in-law's, and even the other brother-in-law's. I felt the ground disappear under my feet when I realized my own wife was financing her entire family at my expense, without me knowing. But this was just the beginning of the most devastating discovery of my life. I returned home in shock and decided to search through her documents more carefully. In her office, in a drawer that was always locked, I found the key hidden behind a picture. Inside there was a parallel world I never knew existed. Apartment rental contracts in her name, motel receipts, intimate photos with Ricardo dating back years. There were even photos of them in our room, in our bed, at times when I was traveling for work. The cold calculator I discovered wasn't the caring woman I thought I knew. She documented everything, as if it were a trophy of the betrayal she managed to keep secret. What made me even more revolted were her notes in a notebook I found at the bottom of the drawer. She wrote about me as if I were a sucker, a perfect provider who worked to support her double life with my brother-in-law. There were phrases like, "He never suspects anything," and "Ricardo said we should be more careful, but it's too easy to fool him." She laughed at me on paper, mocked my trust, and on top of that, planned how to extract more money from me. There were lists of our assets that she intended to liquidate gradually to finance the new life she was building with my brother-in-law. I was just a source of income to fund her betrayal, and she enjoyed it. But I still hadn't discovered the true extent of the conspiracy my family had mounted against me. On her computer, I managed to access the emails because she used the same password for everything. There was proof that my mother-in-law not only knew about the betrayal, but was the intellectual mentor of the entire scheme. There were emails from her instructing Fernanda to how to drain our account without raising suspicions, how to invent work trips, and even suggested that she get pregnant with me to guarantee alimony forever in case he finds out. My mother-in-law, whom I respected like a second mother, had been orchestrating the destruction of my financial and emotional life for years, and I, like an idiot, still brought her gifts every Mother's Day.
The other brothers-in-law were also involved up to their necks in this family farce. I found messages in a WhatsApp group called Sucker Operation where they planned how to ask me for money for different emergencies. Each one had a specialty. One pretended health problems, another invented business crises, and even the youngest sister-in-law pretended to need money for college while spending everything on designer clothes. They took turns so I wouldn't notice the pattern and still laughed at my good intentions in the group. Ricardo coordinated everything, decided who would ask me for money and when, as if he were the director of a play where I was the only one who didn't know I was on stage. The entire family saw me as a golden goose, not as a respected member. When I thought I had already discovered everything, I found something that made me vomit with disgust and revolt. On the phone that the police returned to me after the accident, there was a secret Telegram group with intimate photos and videos of us, from our room, from our bathroom. Fernanda had installed hidden cameras in our own house and shared our intimacy with her family as entertainment. There were comments from them about my body, about our sex life, mockery about my performance, and even bets about when I would discover the betrayal. They turned my private life into a private reality show for the family's amusement. The level of humiliation and disrespect was so deep that I cried with pure rage, alone in my room, realizing I'd been violated in every possible way by people I loved unconditionally. At that moment, looking at all these pieces of evidence spread across the table, I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to just cry and accept being made a fool for 12 years. I wasn't going to let this family of parasites continue living off what I built with honesty. They thought that with Fernanda and Ricardo's death, the evidence would die with them, but they were completely wrong. I had everything documented, photographed, saved on flash drives, and now I had a plan to use every piece of evidence against them. If they wanted to make me a clown for years, now they were going to discover what it's like to be publicly humiliated. The revenge I planned that night was as calculated as their betrayal, except I was going to be much more efficient. First, I gathered all the evidence in an organized way, as if it were a legal case. I printed all the conversations, organized all the receipts, saved all the videos and photos in multiple copies. I hired a lawyer specializing in financial crimes and showed him everything. He was impressed with the amount of evidence and confirmed that I had a case to sue the entire family for fraud, embezzlement, and even privacy violation. But the lawsuit would be just the first phase of my revenge. I wanted them to feel the public humiliation that I felt when I discovered I was a joke among them. They were going to pay for every stolen dollar, for every lie told, for every moment they laughed at me. The perfect opportunity arose the following Sunday, when my mother-in-law organized a morning lunch for the whole family to get together and support each other in this difficult time. She called me with that sweet voice that I now knew was completely fake, saying we needed to stay united, that I was like a son to her. I accepted the invitation with great pleasure because the time had finally come to reveal everything I knew. I spent the week mentally preparing for the confrontation, mentally rehearsing every word I would say, every piece of evidence I would show. They expected to find a tearful and vulnerable widower, someone they could continue manipulating and exploiting. But they were going to find a man who discovered the whole truth and was ready for war. On the day of the lunch, I arrived at my mother-in-law's house carrying a folder with all the evidence organized. I also brought a portable projector that I connected to the living room TV under the pretext of showing memory photos of Fernanda to the family. Everyone settled in the living room with those fake faces of grief, some even pretending to cry. My mother-in-law gave an emotional speech about how the family needed to stay united, how I would always be welcome among them, and how everyone would support me in this difficult time. The brothers-in-law nodded in agreement. Some even patted me on the shoulder in solidarity. When she finished her speech, I stood up and said I had something very important to share with everyone, something that would change everything they thought they knew about Fernanda and Ricardo. I turned on the projector, and the first image that appeared on the screen was a photo of Fernanda and Ricardo naked in my bed. The silence that settled in the room was deafening. Some stopped chewing, others dropped their forks on their plates. My mother-in-law turned white as a ghost and tried to get up, but I asked everyone to remain seated because the presentation was just beginning. I showed the betrayal photos, the intimate videos, the messages from the Sucker Operation group, the bank statements showing money being transferred to their accounts. Each piece of evidence that appeared on the screen tore away a piece of the mourning mask they were wearing. The panic that took over the room was the first installment of my revenge being paid.
When I got to the part with the videos where they mocked me, where they bet on when I would discover the betrayal, where they laughed at my innocence, some tried to get up to leave the room, but I locked the door and kept the key in my pocket, saying no one would leave before seeing everything to the end. My mother-in-law tried to scream that I was crazy, that this was disrespectful to the dead, but I turned up the TV volume and continued showing every piece of evidence. When it got to the part where they planned to ask me for more borrowed money, some began to cry for real, but not from sadness, from desperation at being discovered. The humiliation was stamped on each of their faces, and I was just warming up for what was coming next. I turned off the projector and looked each of them in the eyes before speaking. I said I knew about every stolen cent, every lie told, every moment they laughed at me. I told them I had hired a lawyer and that everyone would be sued for fraud and embezzlement. But the best part was when I revealed that I had already sent all the videos and photos to each of their bosses, friends, and neighbors. The brother-in-law who had jobs became desperate because they knew they would be fired on Monday. The sister-in-law who pretended to be righteous at church began to beg because I had sent everything to the pastor and her friends from the prayer group. My mother-in-law, who thought she was the queen of the neighborhood, discovered that all the neighbors were already talking about her being the intellectual mentor of her daughter's betrayal. But the cherry on top of my revenge was still to come. I called my 2 children, who were at my brother's house, and put them on speakerphone so the whole family could hear. I explained to them in age-appropriate language that Mommy had lied a lot to Daddy, that she had taken our money without permission, and that's why we wouldn't see Mommy's family anymore. My children, who were intelligent, asked questions that I answered honestly. When my mother-in-law tried to talk to them, I hung up the phone and said that she and the rest of the family were forbidden from having any contact with my children. They lost not only the easy source of income, but also access to the grandchildren they claimed to love so much. The pain in their eyes at that moment was exactly what I wanted to see. To finalize my revenge definitively, I revealed that I had canceled all pending loans and was demanding back every cent through legal process. The apartment that the older brother-in-law bought with my money would be seized. The sister-in-law's car that I financed would be repossessed. Even the designer clothes they bought with my sweat would be auctioned to pay the debt. My mother-in-law discovered that her house renovation, which I paid for thinking I was helping a needy widow, would be deducted from the inheritance she intended to leave to her other children. They built an empire of lies on top of my honest work, and now they were going to see this empire collapse, stone by stone, lawsuit by lawsuit, humiliation by humiliation. I left their house, leaving them in complete despair, some crying, others in shock. At the door, I turned and said this was just the first phase of my revenge, that in the coming months, every time they thought the situation couldn't get worse, they would discover I still had more evidence stored away, that every day of their lives would be a reminder that you don't mess with an honest working man's integrity. I left there with a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years, as if I could finally breathe properly after discovering I was being suffocated by a family of leeches. The betrayal hurt, but the revenge brought a satisfaction I'll never forget.
In the following months, I watched from a distance the complete breakdown of this family of parasites. The older brother-in-law was fired when his boss discovered he was using stolen money to maintain his lifestyle. The religious sister-in-law was expelled from church when the pastor showed the videos to the board. My mother-in-law became a pariah in the neighborhood where she was previously respected as a family lady. All the neighbors knew she had raised a thieving and lying daughter and that she was an active accomplice in the betrayal. The funniest part was watching her friends turn their backs one by one because no one wants to be associated with a family of fraudsters. The reputation they took decades to build was destroyed in a matter of weeks. My children adapted well to the new reality without their mother's toxic family. At first, it was difficult to explain why we didn't see the uncles and grandma anymore, but over time they understood that some people do very bad things and need to stay away. I enrolled both of them in psychotherapy to deal with their mother's loss in a healthy way, without the traumas I went through discovering who she really was. Today they have a normal life, with new friends, new activities, and especially with a father who learned to value honesty above all else. We built a new routine based on truth where I never again need to suspect or investigate anyone because I cut all the fake people out of our lives.
Financially, I managed to recover most of the money through lawsuits. The brother-in-law's apartment was auctioned and yielded $35,000 that returned to my account. The cars and assets they bought with my money were seized and sold. Even the jewelry my mother-in-law bought pretending it was a lifetime savings was confiscated when I proved the money came from Fernandez's fraudulent transfers. In total, I recovered almost $75,000 that they had stolen over the years. This money is saved for my children's future, far from the claws of any family parasite. Justice was done both emotionally and financially, and that gave me the peace I needed to move forward. Today, 2 years after this devastating discovery, I can say the revenge was worth every second of planning. It wasn't just about recovering money or humiliating those who betrayed me. It was about restoring my dignity and showing that honesty still has value in this world. I learned that not always the people we love deserve our love, and that true family is the one that respects you, not the one that shares your blood. If you're going through a similar situation, know that the truth always comes to light, and when it does, it brings with it the opportunity to do justice. Don't accept being made a fool by anyone, because in the end, whoever laughs last laughs best. And I'm still laughing today at the desperate faces they made when they discovered the sucker was smarter than they imagined.